viewers, and a very warm welcome. You're watching the brand new edition of To The Point with your host, Kriti Mishra. India has reported lowest rise in daily COVID cases since April 14th. Even as India has reduced its active COVID-19 caseload, the northeastern states are showing a spike in COVID-19 cases. So how is India gearing up to tackle this? Let's find out. Joining me on the program today, Minister for Development of Northeastern Region, MoS PMO, Personnel, Public Grievances, Space and Atomic Energy, Dr. Jitendra Singh. Sir, welcome to Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kriti.
Sir, let's begin talking about Northeast areas first. Recently, you convened an urgent meeting to discuss recent COVID surge in Northeast. Now, Northeast had remained relatively unaffected by COVID in the first wave compared to many other states, and some states like Sikkim did not even have a single corona positive case throughout the lockdown period last year. What is the current assessment of the government as far as Northeast is concerned?
No, I appreciate, Kriti, you have taken up this issue. Though we have been actually conducting a regular monitoring of each of the 8 states of Northeastern region, as we did last year also during the pandemic. And so also since I am also connected to Jammu and Kashmir, so we do the same kind of an exercise for Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh as well. So it's not precisely speaking an urgent meeting, but nevertheless is part of the regular monitoring and assessment and evaluation that we have followed over the last 1 year or so. As you rightly mentioned, there have been reports that Northeast is sending out some kind of a I would not say alarm or some kind of messages of concern. What we have witnessed throughout the country is that in certain cities, in certain places, certain states, you have a surge at a certain point of time, then it flattens down and then shows a decline. Incidentally, in case of Northeastern states, it has happened rather little later than many other states, for example, like Maharashtra or even for Jammu and Kashmir or Delhi. And to a great extent, up to the beginning of May or even to the first week of May, it was not a matter of alarm, I would say, or a concern. But suddenly there was a surge which was witnessed, of course, in the states of Assam, mostly followed by Manipur, also followed by Meghalaya. And in the last 2 days, Tripura had a reproductive rate which was relatively higher because the scientific parlance, they have RT rate, or how fast the virus reproduces. So the RT rate, when they calculated the pan-India statistics for each of the states and the union territories of India, they realized that that was what caused some worry with us, was that Tripura was on the top with about 1.6% RT, which means that a couple of hundred could multiply into a couple of thousands in a couple of days. But mercifully now, in the last 2-3 days, at least in some states, like for example, Assam, there has been a relative flattening of the curve. It's not totally declining, but it's moving like this, and gradually, hopefully, I think in next 2-3 days. Tripura, Meghalaya, of course, there is still a rising graph, but not rising as with the same steep as it was still a few days ago. I think what is the saving grace and the satisfying aspect of this is that Northeastern states, as far as their arrangements and preparedness for COVID management is concerned, are rather better equipped. Because even last year, you would recall that at the behest of the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, it was made sure that the peripheral parts of the country, including the Northeastern region, the peripheral areas of Jammu and Kashmir, the island territories like Andaman, were made available with sufficient supplies of oxygen, so that in case there is a sudden upsurge, they don't have to actually wait too long for that, or don't have to get into any kind of hardship. So from that point of view, Northeastern states are well equipped as far as their oxygen availability concerned, their oxygen beds are concerned, their oxygen generation capacity is rather better than many other states. They are in a position, in fact, Assam has also at one point in time made offer of supplying a part of oxygen to Meghalaya and Manipur. And added to that, we have some collaboration from Japan as well. And Japan and UNDP together have promised us 8 oxygen plants, which are in the process of being installed. One of them is already Nagaland, the other one Meghalaya. So that way we are, I think that generates a lot of confidence, not only among the medical fraternity and the administration, but also among the public at large, because people, the community then feels that in case of any urgency or emergency, there is sufficient arrangement available and nobody will be allowed to suffer or least of all to die on account of the unavailability of oxygen. So that generates a whole lot of morale boosting. So I think we are now, and since we are doing monitoring on day-to-day basis, it has, I think, even from the Ministry of DONER, the Ministry of Development, we have been very preemptive. To the extent that even last year, just in the beginning of lockdown, or just before the national lockdown was announced, we were the first to keep rupees 25 crore at the disposal of the northeastern states in order to arrange for any urgency. And then we also gave them an offer that in case you wish to set up COVID-related infrastructure in the health sector, maybe it's in the form of infectious diseases hospitals, or maybe in the form of any virology-related research or laboratories, we will be there to process your proposals and DPRs on priority. And we are already there for working online. And we carried on the same process throughout this year as well. And as far as vaccination is concerned, the vaccination drive, I am glad to share with you, has picked up very well in the northeastern states. Till about yesterday evening, as many as 71 lakh persons had already got vaccinated, the maximum of them, of course, from the state of 36 lakh. And now we are also into 18 plus. So, and our vaccination centers are very well managed. We have waiting enclosure. Then after the vaccination, when the individual goes through that 30 minutes of mandatory waiting for observation, we have a separate enclosure where he or she is served with coffee, tea, cookies, etc. And I also use this opportunity to share with the audience with a lot of hue and cry sometimes made about the vaccination in India, but as a whole, and I think the credit single most goes to Prime Minister Modi, we have one of the fastest, or maybe the fastest vaccination drives in the world in India. And that is something which is not highlighted enough, or sometimes goes unnoticed. And sometimes in social media, you find here sundry comments which, generate a lot of panic. But I reiterate that India is actually managing one of the fastest vaccination drives in the world. And that becomes all the more significant when we see it in the light of the fact that we are a heterogeneous country as large as India, with a population of 135 crore, split into different kinds of beliefs, faiths, and practices. And we had certain initial problems of, motivating people to come forward for vaccination in certain parts of the country, which of course also have been now overcome. And we have queues of the people, lining up, even in those localities where there was initial hesitancy. Yeah. Secondly, another important statistical aspect, as I mentioned about the fastest drive, is borne out by the fact that on the day when Prime Minister announced the launching of the vaccination, we had first phase vaccination. On the very first day, as many as 3 crore people in India got vaccinated. This is something not often discussed. But what is important to note over here is that 3 crore is a number which is bigger than the number of the total population of many of the European countries. So we had on the very first day vaccinated more number of people than the total population of many of the countries in the Europe. So I think that is something which India has to take pride about. Of course, notwithstanding the fact that there have been mortalities and there can be no condonement of a mortality, and anybody, any family which loses a dear one, of course, would have to endure that loss without any redemption, and there can be no condonement for that. So by and large, now I think what the reassuring part of it is that even though there has been a recent surge in Northeast as far as that region is concerned, the entire situation is very much under control, well managed, administratively, also by the health authorities, and the public also is feeling confident that we are in a position to overcome this challenge. I agree with you that this has become little difficult for us to digest in the early stages, because as you rightly mentioned, in the last wave last year, Northeast had remained relatively unaffected. And as you mentioned, the first case in Sikkim, we had, after the lockdown was over, the unlock one, when one of the students studying in the Delhi University traveled back home. And, that was the first case today. Nagaland, for example, throughout the lockdown, did not have a single case. Now we have. So I think that is something, we had got so much, I would not say complacent, but we had felt quite confident as far as the Northeast model of COVID management is concerned. But the second wave has proved to be very virulent. Exactly. It has proved to be both infective as well as virulent. Contrary to the scientific predictions made till about a few months back, that this wave would be more infective but less virulent, which means that we'll be infecting each other very easily, but then it'll end up with cough, cold, and some kind of mild symptoms. Nobody had foreseen that it could lead to liver dysfunction, it could lead to clotting mechanisms, it could lead to progressive severe pneumonias. So I think that second wave has what is actually spread over to Northeast, but I'm sure in the next few days, rather sooner than later, we will have a progressive decline of the curve, both in the terms of, and other feature which is quite in contrast to Jammu and Kashmir in Northeast is that though we have a high positivity rate, we do not have a high mortality rate. So which means if we have a very high positivity rate, the recovery rate is also correspondingly high. So I think that saves us from the grief of losing our dear ones, which unfortunately we had to go through in the last few weeks in case of Jammu and Kashmir.
Absolutely, sir. But given the huge diversity in population in a small geography in Northeast, how are we overcoming the geographic challenges to improving the access to healthcare, including testing, isolation, and treatment as well?
No, I agree with you. And in fact, in difficult terrains and difficult topographies, it becomes very difficult. There are challenges of communication, challenges of transport. And even otherwise, in the far-flung peripheral areas like these, whether it be Northeast, whether it's Jammu Kashmir, whether it's Ladakh, the health infrastructure in the remote areas is not adequate enough or not optimally present. And when we are faced with a sudden crisis like this, it starts showing some cracks. So I think one of the best options to handle this, which I have been going around propagating, and I think we have also succeeded to a great extent, is promotion of the teleconsultation option. The consultation for COVID patients wherever they are, which could be done even at the panchayat level, and it doesn't require a medical expert also. If you have a technical person or anybody who's little media savvy, who knows how to have these links and connect the video conferences, could be arranged to have consultation with the best of specialists living in towns or seated in bigger hospitals. And I think that applies to all the hilly terrains. And in fact, as far as my own Lok Sabha constituency is concerned, I have started the process of having teleconsultation facility in each of the district hospitals. And I am also motivating the district development council members to help us set up such telecommunications, even in the setup which is already available. So I think that, and then also it will help you in reaching out to the patients who are under home management, not necessarily hospitalized. So that is, I think, one thing. But but government has certainly made arrangements to carry vaccines and the necessary equipment to all the peripheral areas.
All right, sir, let's shift focus to Jammu and Kashmir, as you were telling us about your constituency in Udhampur. Now, in Jammu and Kashmir, we are witnessing a plateauing of the second wave of COVID-19 infections after 60 days of rising numbers, with both mortality and active positive cases showing a downward trend. You also met and urged the Kashmir leaders to push forward the vaccination drive, irrespective of the political ideology in the valley. But the administration is facing a peculiar challenge: high mortality among COVID-19 patients in the Jammu division, despite fewer cases. So you're also a doctor. Why is that?
No, you're right, Kriti. We are regularly in touch with the administration. In fact, we have tried to reach out up to the district level, up to the block level. We regularly interact with the district collectors and also other members of the administration, with the health authorities, whether it be the chief medical officers, whether it be the principals or the heads of the teaching institutions or the medical colleges, or the elected representatives in the form of the district council members or the municipal heads. Because I personally feel that this is a pandemic which, unlike many other diseases, would call for a management which is three-pronged. A, the medical management; B, the administrative management; and C, the community management. So unless all the three work in perfect coordination, we would not be able to achieve the optimal results. Like, for example, medical management, obviously, as you know, it would require administrative management to reach out for vaccination, to arrange for vaccination. Now, many people say, why not make vaccine available in plenty? Why not, manufacture in a larger quantity, without understanding the nuances that this is a vaccine which has a short life. You cannot, manufacture vaccine in such huge quantities that it's not be able to dispense with. And then the vaccination process carries on for long. Even our pulse polio program did not, could not be accomplished or completed just within a fortnight. So that these are the constraints. So where the administration comes in to make the availability of vaccine available, to make the availability of oxygen plants, oxygen. And third is the community management. As you said, certain myths, certain misgivings about whether to use vaccine or not, if to use, when to use. If I have already got myself vaccinated, then do I still need to carry on with face masks and all those other guidelines? So there, the community participation, because the elected representatives of the community, the opinion leaders of the community have a wider say and possibly also trustworthiness and credibility. Like, for example, I too got a COVID infection after I had gone through two vaccinations. But I have to then understand that maybe where I erred was that I exposed myself to a very heavy load of virus because I was traveling for 2 months in the District Development Council elections, then immediately after that for 2 months in the Assam election, and then the Mizoram, and then went back to the constituency. So all these factors combined together, of course, the basic immunity level of the individual. So we cannot then, take anything for granted. Now, this is where the communities comes in. Plus, we have also at the level of the organization, at the level of society, at the level of our individual efforts, try to set up COVID care centers with oxygen availability and with also availability of food and other necessary items. So all this requires a huge lot of community participation. And therefore, as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, as you coming back to what you were mentioning, we saw a peak around the middle of May, maybe after 13th of May, it certainly started peaking. But I'm glad in the last few weeks, to be precise, after 16th or 17th of May, gradually it started declining. And now there has been a progressive decline. For example, overall in the state, in the UT of Jammu and Kashmir, if the mortality rate had gone up to about 2 to 3%, now it's come down to 1%, even less than that. Jammu division alone, which was causing little more concern and also, public worry, had a higher mortality rate compared to Kashmir division. Now that was a unique feature. Kashmir, in fact, Kashmir division has 10 districts, who also has Jammu district. So Kashmir district division was recording higher number of positivity, unlike the contrary to the impression prevailing in many quarters that Kashmir has lesser and Jammu is more. It's not so. Kashmir actually had a positivity rate which went up to about 14-15%. And then now it's come back to 8%, 9%, like that. Yes. But the mortality was lesser. Yes, the mortality was lesser. And what caused some amount of social unrest in Jammu was that in Jammu division, though the positivity rate was not more than 10% or so at any point of time, now it's come down to 7% or 6%. It was much lesser compared to the Kashmir division, but the mortality was higher. So mortality went up to the extent that on any given day in the 10 districts of Jammu, we would have 60, 70 cases, averaging 6 to 7 deaths per district, which has now come down to just about 3 deaths per district or 2 deaths per district. So gradually it's come to, from 60, 70, it's come to 20. So I think as far as the social perception, the social response is concerned, even one death, causes a huge lot of concern. for obvious reasons. And particularly if the word goes out, rightly or wrongly, that the death has happened on account of unavailability of oxygen. I was telling the medical professionals also, if in case of even a single mortality, the word goes out that it has happened on account of the unavailability of oxygen, it actually negates the entire good work done. So that is possibly what happened in Jammu. But then we were regularly interacting with the health authorities. We also managed to send a team of experts from the center, which spent 2 days there. The government medical college in Jammu was toned up in a big way. Some of the shortcomings were identified. Some of the inherent deficiencies in the system were immediately put to be rectified. And therefore, I think now it's being streamlined. And to begin with, we had 45 plus vaccination in the entire Union Territory, and 18 plus just to begin with in the 2 capital cities of Jammu and Srinagar. But now it's started in the other places also. Like, for example, from today, we have 18 plus even in Kathua. So likewise, we are, and now we have oxygen plants. There's not a single district which doesn't have an oxygen plant. Some of the districts have more than one, like Jammu, of course, being a main district, Srinagar, of course, even Kathua has got 2 or 3 oxygen plants. Because you see, the setting up of oxygen plants and setting up of oxygen preparedness gives a lot of confidence to the society, regardless of whether oxygen actually comes to be used or not, or whether patient requires oxygen or not. The other place where the community comes into role, which also we have now attended, is the holding of drugs and oxygen, which had started. You know, I was shocked about 2 weeks back when a family called up to tell me that they were in dire need of remdesivir, which of course now is in certain places being dropped from the prescription. They were prescribed remdesivir, and then they approached the market. They were offered an injection of remdesivir for as many as 20,000. And there is where the community comes in. So I immediately got into the exercise of motivating all the good Samaritans and all the social-minded, right-thinking citizens to go around and start educating people that, look here, this amounts to a sin. If you hoard oxygen in your house, if you hoard remdesivir in your house, you know, with the anticipation that one day you will require it if you get COVID, it may or may not be required, because you might develop COVID, but you may not require this. But just imagine the case of somebody else, you know, who's seriously sick in another house and who's struggling for life, and he's asked to pay 20,000. So you are actually committing a sin against that individual, sin against society, sin against humanity, and possibly also sin against your own conscience. So that kind of, and now we have helplines also. So I think that work has been taken up in Jammu and Kashmir, also in Ladakh, even Ladakh this year. Last year we had a huge influx. In fact, Ladakh was the region which showed initial alarm, which caused initial alarm in India, if you remember, in the month of February or March 2020, because there was a group of passengers who would come from Iran after a pilgrimage and then the whole. But this year, the fatality rate in Ladakh has been just about 1%, and the recovery rate has been 90%, which means there's been very little mortality. So the oxygen there is in plenty, because they already have oxygen generation plants in place, even in the pre-COVID era, because of the high altitude we there. So I think in a nutshell, the message that is that the government of it, now see, one of the accusations sometimes made against the government is that they could not foresee the second wave. Now tell me, who had foreseen? Even the best of the scientific brains in the world had not seen it. Even the best of the medical experts had not seen it. In fact, till as late as maybe January or even February, many of the scientific articles were also predicting that this wave would be more infective, less virulent. Yes. Nobody said. So how do you then justify in accusing the political dispensation? But what is praiseworthy about the Modi government and Prime Minister Modi personally monitoring day-to-day basis is that drawing the latest reliable scientific inferences, the guidelines and the management regimen is being, you know, revisited from day-to-day basis, and accordingly the arrangements are being made. So I think there's a huge amount of role which could also be played by some of the media friends and media outlets like you in rebuilding that kind of a confidence. Now, this is something which has taken the entire world by surprise. This is not an India-specific phenomena, but India has managed it much better than even those countries which possibly had a better health infrastructure in place, even in the pro-COVID era. So I think that is, and the manner in which we have overnight oriented ourselves to manage this is something which I think should generate a huge lot of confidence and reassurance in the public mind.
Well, absolutely, sir. On Sansad TV, we've been reiterating and urging people to follow COVID-appropriate behavior and saying that patience and not panic is the key. Well, before we sign off, sir, you're also the DOPT minister. A lot of UPSC aspirants are our viewers. The civil services preliminary exam, which was scheduled to be held on June 27th, will now be held on October 10th. What is your message to those aspirants?
No, I think this is in the larger interest and the larger concern for the well-being of the aspirants and their families, of course. So when a demand like this came, basically the exam is conducted by the UPSC. DOPT is more of a nodal authority. But when the UPSC also held this view and we also concurred, I think it's in the larger interest, because obviously we could not have taken risk with the health and the well-being of the aspirants, in spite of the fact that most of the aspirants are, sometimes they are so passionately prepared for the exam and they have been into, long hours of reading, writing and preparing for the preceding 6-8 months. So they are actually looking forward to the day to write the exam. But then it's something which is an imponderable happening, neither their control nor ours. So I think they would also appreciate their interest. The decision was taken.
Absolutely, sir. It is in the interest of the public. On that note, Dr. Singh, you joined us. Thank you so much for speaking to Sansad Television.
Thank you.
All the best for all your endeavors for Jammu and Kashmir, for Northeast, and of course for entire India.
Thank you, Kriti. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you.